Hi everyone, Jay here from Jade Productions, bringing you another video, and today's video is on the brand new General's Handbook 2020. Now, it's not up for release yet, but Games Workshop is doing its previews of it, and they've been discussing it, set to come out sometime soon, and they put up a thing on Warhammer Community, an article, and it talks about some of the changes to matched play, and I noticed some interesting things when I was looking through it, and I'm just going to discuss how I think this will affect the meta, quote-unquote, going forward for competitive play and what it really means for armies. So the first things first is they always talk about new points. New points is definitely something they, it's how they balance the game primarily. And they talk about in 2020, they talk about how, it's all been yada yada, corporate speak. And then they give two examples of things that have had their points go down quite a lot. And now the first of those things is Liberators and Putrid Blight Kings. Now, these are things I didn't see a lot of play, but they were also battle lines, so you had no choice but to take them in large numbers. So I'm interested to see what else they think really required either making their points larger or their points smaller. Now, you can speculate all sorts of stuff, but there is a thing where the points, you just can't really talk about the points that often or that well. You can only speculate, which is not the purpose of this video. There is the interesting point that the points of things that came after Cities of Sigmar. So that is an interesting side note, in my opinion, because the books that came after Cities of Sigmar are Ossiarch Bone Reapers, Ogre Moor Tribes, Slaves to Darkness, Caradron Overlords, Disciples of Tzeentch, and Seraphon. And those are some there's some controversial and very powerful books in there. And Lumineth, presumably, now that their book is technically out, which I'm annoyed at how G-Dubs has handled that release. But the balancing of points in particularly the Ossiarchs and the Ogres is going to be what interests me the most. Because the Ogres are a very competitive faction. They're very powerful. They have a very solid base for their army, regardless of which kind you build, whether it be focused on the Moo Cow guys, whose names escapes me, or the Gluttons, Beastclaw Raiders. Whether it be Beastclaw Raiders or Gluttons. And they're a really, really well-balanced army. That can be really tough to take. And I've seen, before COVID virus quarantines, they were doing really well. And that's something I'm interested in. How are they going to get more expensive, and what kind of balances they might do to that faction? And the other one being the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, a faction that is well and truly, since its release in 2019, cemented itself as one of the strongest factions in the game currently, due to redonkulously good rules and redonkulously good models. Like, it's kind of dumb. And to be honest, the Petrofax Elite is probably one of the silliest rules interactions with units in an army. Especially considering things like an Ironclad, a literal flying battleship, only has a 3-up save, but the walking skeleton dude made of other skeletons is so filled with magic and stuff to make his skeleton even harder that he has a 2-up save. Yeah, let that sink in. So, that's some interesting things, and now the other things are things like Caradron Overlords. They're a faction that has notoriously had balance problems since their first edition in first edition. Their points were all over the place. Nothing was worth its points cost because they were absolute dog shit. And now with their second edition, they're a book that particularly is pretty good. They're pretty good, but they're a little overpriced. And to be honest, the Ironclad is still overpriced for what it does. It's 510 points. It should really only be about 450. But that is the thing. What will they do? And then other units have in that book are also criminally undercosted for their effectiveness. It's just you don't field them because everyone assumes that you have to field them in a certain configuration, and it's a trap. And then Seraphon. Probably the most underwhelming release of the last several books. Like, Ossiarchs were fantastic, but super high points cost. And now, are they going to make those go up or down? And I reckon the Ossiarchs will go down. Ogres, I reckon they'll go down. Slaves to Darkness, really good, but I reckon they'll probably not really change too much of them. Caradrons, I suspect the ships might go down a little bit. I don't see those ships going up in points. Disciples of Tzeentch, really, really good book. I actually suspect they'll raise the points of certain things. And then you have Seraphon, a book where nothing is worth its points cost, everything is trash, and the insane amount of luck you need to pull the combinations off makes the army borderline, well, completely mediocre. They're smack bang average in the center of competitive ability. They're a perfectly balanced army because everything is bad. So, on to that I say, they don't need any points changes, really. So that's an army that, and I'm saying this as a Seraphon player, whose primary army is Seraphon and Skaven, is, you know, what I think that's going to be like. And that's going to be interesting to see what they do there. Particularly since they say it's those books. And if you play those books, you're going to have it updated for free. So, that's pretty good. Now, the thing that the real meat of what caught my attention was first the new secondary or auxiliary objectives, as they call, where you get a new set of secondary objectives you choose before the battle, and you can complete them, and any draw will change to a minor victory for you. Now that's really interesting. Typically, I find draws are pretty uncommon unless you have a real huge stalemate, and neither player really attacks each other, but they are possible. And they gave two examples here. The first is the Invader. You complete this auxiliary objective if, at the end of the battle, you have more friendly units wholly within your opponent's territory than your opponent has wholly within your territory. Interesting, a good way to score points. I think that'll be, and stuff like it, is definitely going to change up how you consider objectives, because it's the number one advice I give, and number one thing you learn when you play Age of Sigmar. It's the objectives matter more than killing stuff in most cases. If you let your opponent, if you focus on killing him but just let a unit sit on an objective for 3 turns, they can pile up so many points, or if they just take one of your objectives for 1 turn, they can end up remarkably ahead. So, the way that Age of Sigmar games are never really decided until the end, unless it's been completely one-sided with who controls the objectives, and you didn't play to the objectives, is you end up with a case of a really game where you can swing really far because of how it plays. And this, I think, is going to close that gap of how far the points can get between players, just to make that potential sudden turnaround even higher. Because you know the game's over when you're at 0 points and your opponent's at 7, or you're at 5 points to their 14. However, stuff like this could potentially help make these games even closer, and that's a really good thing. And now most games tend to either be one of those two, and so I think adding these in was their attempt to make a nice middle ground. So we'll see how it pans out. They have another one where Marked for Death, when you reveal this auxiliary objective, your opponent must pick 1 unit in their starting army that is not a hero. You complete this auxiliary objective if that unit is destroyed before the end of the battle. Now, your opponent picks it, so they can always pick something that's going to be really, really tough. But it'll be good for factions that are really excel at laying down the damage on one particular unit and really buffing stuff up. If you're half guard, if you're fighting a Fire Slayers player and you picked that, they're always going to pick the half guard berserkers, and you're never going to get that unless you are playing Bone Reapers. But that is the thing. It will definitely, I think, that one benefit factions like Caradrons, who can really focus guys down from range really quickly with high damage output. Really pinprick them to death. To be honest, the Mark to Death is not really a really plausible one compared to Invader, which your opponent's territory, depending on the map you're playing on and the battle plan, the territories can be either quite large, quite small, so it can actually be really easy to accomplish that one in certain mobile factions. And you always want some mobility options, will be not only competing for getting into objectives, but also getting into your opponent's field, into their backlines. And factions with deep strike abilities are really going to question where they want to come down. Do they want to come down and stop your opponent from doing that, even though he doesn't have this secondary? Or will you focus on putting them down there just to try and get this point at the end of the battle? So, yeah. Now, the question is, the thing that has me concerned of whether or not they're really going to be effective is the wording they've used of secure more of them than your opponent, and any draw will be changed to a minor victory. And if they don't just flat out give you victory points like secondary objectives at the end of the game, then I feel that they're going to be wasted potential. And if that's the case, their impact is almost going to be negligible, because you then have to achieve a draw in order to get it, and then you also have to achieve one of these. So, we'll see what that happens. Next, the new Realm rules. Now, Realm rules are always really fun and really awesome, and they should have been a huge part of the main game, and they weren't. No one really used them, except for Malign Sorcery's book, where Endless Spells were first introduced, where the relics in there were used to great effect. And many of the relics in there became hugely important to the meta. Things like Eighth Quartz brooches, getting you, which they mention here in the article, which is a really good relic, which gives you a command point on I think it's a 5-up, when you spend one. And then you have things like the Ethereal Amulet and the Sword of Judgment. You can pick that, you could pick the huge, big, indestructible monster if it was a character, like a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, or a particularly nasty Vampire Lord. And you could also put it on Idoneth units that were particularly nice, the Eidolon. Seen it run with those, giving it ethereal and fly so that it's just unrendable. That is particularly good. And then things like the Sword of Judgment, which you could put on a Skaven Vermin Lord of Corruption with his 10 attacks. All of a sudden, every 6-up to hit is not only doing 1 mortal wound in addition, it also is doing an additional d6 damage, d6 mortal wound, instead. So you could really just tear things to pieces with mortal wounds with the high number of attacks that guy had. Now, what's interesting here, and just ignoring what they say about the realm rules in general and what they show off, is they put it right here underneath it. The realm artifacts from Malign Sorcery have been replaced with a smaller, tighter list. You'll still be able to choose thematic, realm-specific options, but you'll also be encouraged to branch out and look at your army's own artifacts list, rather than always comparing it with the Eighth Quartz brooch and, the other ones in there, because something like the Griff Feather Charm, that was pretty much a go-to. If you didn't have a good relic, you would go to it. And it was quite often the case, especially with certain books and certain armies, and it's still the case, that your relics just suck. And so they do less than what these generic ones do. And there's no downside to taking the generic ones, other than saying you're from a realm, which will never really matter, because it never really did. Now, it says being replaced, and now I wonder if they're going to consign the Malign sorceries stuff just to narrative play, which I hope they do. But replacing that, I think you're going to see a lot less of those relics moved, and that's their intent, and I think that's going to be a big game changer, because a lot of those relics are things that I would see in every sort of topping tournament list since Malign sorceries was released. I would very rarely, when I would go and examine a tournament outcome and go examine the lists, I would rarely see a faction's specific relic in the topping armies. Very rarely. In fact, I'd almost never see them in a competitive tournament. The locals is a bit different. I saw a nice mixture used, but it didn't really start. I didn't really start to see more of the faction-specific ones since Fire Slayers. So, and really, mostly it was just the Fire Slayers because they've got some amazing relics. And some of the Slaanesh ones. But that's the thing. I mean, even in a competitive Skaven list, which focuses on a army build around, say, Plague Monks and Clan Pestilence, you not really bother with any of the Clan Pestilence relics. You would, if you're bringing a Verminlord of Corruption, you should just always go straight to the Sword of Judgment. And if you get an extra relic, well, then pick something. And if you're going... So, yeah, I'm interested. I think that's really going to shake things up. I think that's going to shake things up more than what we think it will. Now, they give some examples. Now, in this realm of battle, the Ulgu Realm of Shadow, which they show off here for matched play, I'm interested in... When they say a smaller, tighter list, will it be like this in how they've presented it, where every realm gets one artifact? Or will there actually be a separate list of generic ones, maybe 3 or 6 of each instead of 9, or well, actually it was 12 for each realm. So, now, I'll quickly talk about this Realm of Battle and what they showed off. Now, Realm Sphere... And you've got the Realm Sphere, what do you call it? Realm Sphere Magic, Judgment of Shadow. And it's a casting value of 7. You pick one enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster, and roll 7 dice. Yep. For each roll that is less than the unit's unmodified save characteristic, the unit suffers 1 mortal wound. If a target has an unmodified save characteristic of nothing, it suffers 1 mortal wound for each 2+ instead. Yep. Okay. Short range, nice. Little high casting value. But it's something. I don't see that being hugely important. The Realmscape features is what's going to be the interesting thing. For example, they say here that Realmscape features in here will get the Overgrown Scenery rule, listed on page 75. I'm not familiar with that scenery rule. I could not find it when I looked through my rule books. I may have missed it, but I think it might be something new. Depending on what that is, many factions have scenery that they rely on, particularly Blades of Khorne, Nurgle. So, there will come a question of, if more and more of these things affect terrain or affect things that are going, I think they'll make the battles more interesting, so long as they're not overtly oppressive or obvious, just like the original ones in the main rulebook, where they could be everything from nothing happens to everything is on fire. And now that one guy is totally going to win because he already hit 4 and a truckload of damage, and now he gets more damage on his melee weapons. Sure. The Realm artifact is not worth talking about. The Realm Command is interesting. I think it's going to be the Realmscape features and the Realm of Command and the Realm Command that make these Realm of Battles relevant in any sort of competitive play. Depending on what magics they get, obviously we can't say anything based on we've only seen one spell, an okay one, but that's the thing. And so the Realm Command is, you can use this command ability once per battle at the end of your movement phase. If you do so, pick one friendly unit wholly within 18 inches of a friendly hero, remove that unit from the battlefield, and then set it up again wholly within 6 inches of that friendly hero and more than 9 inches from any enemy units. That is interesting. You're essentially going to be pulling them back half of the distance. Fortunately, I see that being really easy to stop, but it will have its uses. Again, it's all about taking objectives and holding them and moving around the board. So I think there's a number of factions that are going to benefit from that. I'm interested to see if any local tournaments will use these. I think it'll be good that they do, but I don't see them being committed to. I mean, maybe a larger event will, but locals, I don't know, depends on your local. I know for me personally, I'm not sure if they'll be used, but in terms of their potential effect, I think they're balanced in... I think they're balanced. Yeah. I think they're balanced in the fact that they don't do anything crazy, and they potentially add small little effects that both armies can take advantage of. And then the last thing was meeting engagements. Now, I don't play many meeting engagements because I don't really play at 1,000 points unless it's with a brand new army, and even then I just play with standard 1,000-point games. Now, nothing really caught my attention here because they just talk about new stuff and team battles, and that's really it. So, the new General's Handbook, I'm curious. I can't wait to see it and see what it does. The removal of the Malign sorceries artifacts, though, I think is going to be the biggest shake-up that it could possibly bring. Points is always, well, the points can always change. The points change, you know. And the new realm features is, sure, they're cool. And now we have them for competitive play where they're balanced and there's no need to not use them. But the nerfing of the Malign sorceries, and whether that be relegating it to one of the other areas of play or just flat out squatting like the majority of that book, is going to be, I think, really going to change how certain factions build their... Well, it'll change your relics, and it might encourage more combination-based rather than simple, here is a unit, and here is the relic that lets it do X the best, rather than this unit synergizes with this unit in order to get this synergy off, so I can pull this combo off. Relics are a bit of a wild card, but they are an important part of your army, and they can certainly be important in certain armies to pulling stuff off. I think this will encourage more builds like that, rather than just, I've built this really powerful thing, it doesn't need anything else because all its units buff each other. I'll just take this one random throwaway artifact to make that one guy unkillable for 3 rounds. So that is what I'm most curious to see, and that is the thing that really caught my attention when I was reading this. We don't have too much more information on the General's Handbook, but I'll keep following it and see what they show off and look out for more information, and when it drops, you can look forward to me after I have some time to review it and read it, and unfortunately reviewing, in my opinion, requires you to play it, and I'm not in a position to do that right now, but I'll be able to give at least a comprehensive analysis of the changes and give some initial impressions of what some of these new rules are going to mean. So, I have been Jay from Jade Productions. Happy wargaming, and I will see you next time.